8 months ago, I applied for the job of governor of Virginia. Tonight, you have hired me.
We lose an election, but we don't give up.
Virginians elect their newest leaders. Tonight, our editorial roundtable looks back at the races and ahead to Virginia's political future. This is What Matters. Good evening. I'm Kathy Lewis. We started the week with robocalls and last-minute campaigning, and we end it with a new governor-elect. This political season may be over, and now comes the hard part, governing a state that's growing more fiscally challenged almost by the day. And we turn to our editorial roundtable for its take on the election. Joining us this week, Daily Press reporter Kimball Payne. We're also happy to have with us tonight Don Lozado, the editorial page editor of the Virginian Pilot. Vivian Page blogs at blog.vivianpage.com, and Brian Kerwin blogs at bearingdrift.com with the Republican point of view. So I'm going to ask our crew to go ahead and get the gloat cam on Brian right now, because we have all been looking forward to this. What a night.
Yeah, it's change I can believe in, I'll tell you that. Well, first, as much as I'd love to gloat about Bob McDonnell getting more votes for governor than anybody in history, even George Allen. The margin was a surprise, but the outcome really wasn't. Many people have said this, and I've been saying it for years, especially the independents in our state. We're a reactionary state. Whatever's going on in Washington, we vote the opposite. You know, George Bush gave us Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, and Bill Clinton gave us George Allen and Jim Gilmore. Obama gave us McDonnell.
So here we are, huh? Mm-hmm. So you said you were surprised by the margin, though.
Yeah, I did. I saw it wide, and I thought we were going to end up near 58. It actually wound up at 59, only in the closing weeks. I expected the thing to tighten as we got closer to November, and it never did. Yeah. It just never did.
Well, let's talk about Vivian, I want to get your take on this as well.
It was a tough night. It was a tough night to be a Democrat in Virginia, but you know, I expected the race to tighten up as well. I actually thought the margin was going to end up being somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 points. Never in my wildest dreams did I think we were going to end up being down 18 or whatever the final number ended up being. And that, of course, brought with it the loss of our seats in the House of Delegates, which ended up being, at this point, where we sit right now with down 6 seats. Yeah. I don't think anyone anticipated there was, just as there was a big blue wave in Virginia last year, there was a red tsunami, really, in Virginia in 2009.
And so we're going to get to those House races in a moment and kind of talk about what that means, but let's stick with the governor's race just for a moment. And I want to get all of you to weigh in on this. What happened? What made Bob McDonnell successful? What made Creed Eads not successful?
Well, there's no question that Bob ran a better, more disciplined and professional campaign, and Creed didn't. It was one of those years in which the message was overwhelmed by what was happening in Washington, and it was just very hard to get through for any of these guys to get their message through. So I think the form of the message actually mattered perhaps more than it usually does. Yeah. And McDonnell just ran a better campaign than Deeds did.
And then, of course, you had this situation with the primary where Deeds really couldn't get up and running until much later, and Bob McDonnell had been out there for a long time. Sure.
Well, Bob McDonnell had been out there for a long time, building name recognition, there's no doubt about it, but I think the fundamental flaw was that Deeds did not define himself. Deeds ended up trying to define McDonnell on the campaign trail, and I had a lot of people in the last couple of days of the races, I mean, they know what I do, and they say, well, you know, what's he all about? I have no idea what he's all about. I've been watching these ads. I have no idea what he's about. And I know that what he thinks of Bob McDonnell, but I don't know what he thinks of himself. Yeah. And I think that was a fundamental flaw.
It reminded me a little bit of the Dukakis race, because it was only in the fading days of that campaign that he started to define himself. I mean, it was the same thing here. You saw Deeds start to define himself, but by then it was way too late. Yeah. I mean, McDonnell had done such a good job of getting his message out that there wasn't any room.
Go ahead. I will say the consultant class took advantage of the Democratic Party once more, because the reason why, in my humble opinion, why Creed was not able to ever get out there and define himself was because the consultants that he brought in after the primary told him they got this gift laid in their lap called the thesis, and
which they did not discover. The Washington
Post did not discover, and the Washington Post did discover, and they ran with that And even when people were telling them to get off of it, you know, folks of us who were involved, other people around were saying it was time to move on. The consultant class told them that they had to stay on. I think it's critical for people to understand that there are these people who move from campaign to campaign and tell people what to do, and that doesn't. There's no doubt that Cree is ultimately responsible for his own campaign.
But this happens so often in Virginia.
It happens a lot.
Where and it happens House of Delegates races. It happens at statewide level, where you get these folks from out of town coming in. And I don't know what happens to the candidates. It's like they've forgotten everything they know about working in Virginia and being in Virginia. It's as if they get an amnesia moment and they just, well, you're from out of town.
I don't think it's amnesia. I think you have to understand what a candidate's life is like. And when you start getting into working 17, 20-hour days, you no longer trust your own judgment.
So, Brian, you do this for a living, too.
The problem was clarity. And it's a problem, and I don't know if Cree had a way out of it, but there's no popular way to say, I'm going to raise taxes in this economy. And so Cree couldn't bring himself to lie and say, I'll never support a tax increase. So he fumbled and said, well, I'm not allowed to say I'll raise taxes, but I'm not allowed to say I won't, so I'll kind of meander in the middle for 5 minutes on camera. And independents who decided this election, they don't want that.
That moment was...
Well, the fumble...
Tell me what you're going to tell me.
Right. The fumbling was the problem. If he had said... You know, I believe there's more support for a gas tax increase for transportation than you do. But if he had just simply said,
strong, and
if he had said, this is what I'm going to do.
The editorial board may support taxes a lot more than voters do. There haven't been many tax increasing delegates who got elected.
So we're watching a video of the rally where President Obama came down in support of Cree Deeds. Didn't seem to have much of an impact.
Too little, too late.
Too little, too late.
Absolutely, too little, too late. That was one of the other big problems with the campaign, and part of the reason why we lost those seats. The organization that we've seen in place in the past for gubernatorial campaigns just simply wasn't there. I'm a regular voter. I vote in every election. I got not a single phone call, not a single piece of mail or anything, and I wasn't the only one, because the consultant class that decided who they were going to reach out and touch, they didn't even think to reach out and touch the core base of the party.
I mean, you got to understand, and the Obama thing, there's another, I watched every minute of that event. That event was about Obama. It wasn't about Cree Deeds. Cree Deeds went on before Obama. That was an Obama event. His speech was mostly about him and his presidency and what he did last year. It wasn't about Cree. Cree had just happened to be the reason he was there.
You know, I think it's also interesting to take a look at these House of Delegates races, because to me that's where the action is really, really interesting in terms of what it means to Hampton Roads. Sort of anticipated outcomes at the top of the statewide ticket. But boy, you've got some really fundamental change underway, certainly on the peninsula. Phil Hamilton losing his seat.
Listen, we talk about a candidate not defining themselves. I mean, Robin Abbott essentially won her campaign by stepping away from the stage and saying this is a referendum on Phil Hamilton. I mean, she stayed away from a lot of these voter forms at the very end just to not even give Phil a stage, because the bottom line is Phil Hamilton's been in Richmond in the General Assembly since the 80s. Since the late 80s, the guy could run circles around most of the delegates in terms of, you know, getting
really
up there and talking public policy. So Abbott knew that she was just going to get blasted at these forums by a guy who said, well, I sponsored a bill like that a dozen years ago. You know, and how do you compete with that? Exactly. Here's the bill number, and here's how much it passed. And so she essentially just said, listen, this is a referendum on Phil, and the voters said, you know, you saw how they broke. I mean, the voters, you had McDonald winning precincts by 150 votes and Hamilton losing them by 60 votes. I think
that was the most poignant. It wasn't just in the 93rd. That was one of the more interesting things to see. Okay, we got to the House of Delegates race. It was almost like a clean slate. Okay, I voted for the statewide, and yeah, that draws certain people to the polls and gives you an edge, but it doesn't lock your victory. There were a lot of Democrats who won in districts that McDonald carried.
I thought that was interesting too, and the other piece of that has to do with the fact that there seemed to be such a disconnect between what I would call the political intelligentsia on the peninsula and what they wanted. You had Mayor Frank coming out for Phil Hamilton. I mean, you had some high-profile people coming out for Phil Hamilton, and then the voters saying, No, I'm not so much
interested in
that.
That's your cue for your endorsement.
Part of that problem had to do, though, with the fact that at the time that Joe Frank and Alan Diamondstein decided to endorse Phil Hamilton was back before Robin Abbott got in the race. And what they basically said was the guy who was going to run. It was a young man by the name of Chris Ray. And Chris Ray got in the race, and they took one look and said, we don't know you, therefore we're not going to support you. I mean, basically, that's what I was told that happened.
Well, and Phil's a known commodity.
And delivers the goods.
I'm not saying that he's not.
And very powerful, delivers the goods.
So Robin actually came into the race after all that had already taken place. And one thing that you don't do in politics is once you issue an endorsement, unless your name is, what's that guy named, Brandon Bell? You don't flip your endorsements. Once you endorse, you're done.
Yeah. I think that's going to be so interesting. What does it mean in terms of the...
because the big deal with Phil is that you're losing a significant power broker.
Sure.
Listen, I mean, I'm at the ground level of all this stuff that was going on with Old Dominion. I mean, the whole 9 yards. I understand that. I'm not giving that short shrift, but you are losing the ranking Republican on appropriations who was a budget negotiator. I mean, you point me to a bigwig in Hampton Roads right now.
Who was able to put things back in the budget for the region.
You've got very few bigwigs in Hampton Roads.
Still have Johnny Joanna.
But see, voters have, and this isn't something new. Voters have always been the no one is indispensable. And this one showed it true, too. Endorsements get you only so far. At some point, people say, okay, who do I like better? And whether they have a list a mile long of people endorsing them, I've never seen voters make up their mind before.
And voters knew, because they had heard from 2 out of 3 members of the Republican ticket, the Speaker of the House, that Hamilton was toast. He was done. He was not going to be the power broker that he had been. He was not going to be able to bring home the goods, at least not in the first session coming back.
I think that alone actually flipped some of the votes, because there were some people that, had they not seen the leadership, and had they not seen that happen and thought that Phil was still going to keep his same position and be in the same power, they would have held their noses and voted for Phil no matter what. Okay, that was absolutely part of the calculus.
I'm thinking that Bob McDonnell and Bill Bolling were probably heaving, in some respect, a little bit of a sigh of relief, in the sense that they had called for Phil's resignation, and so if Phil Hamilton had gotten elected, that might have created an awkward moment. I'm just thinking.
At least Bolling had the courage to tell Phil to his face. I mean, that's not exactly a profile in courage for our new governor.
Well, there you have it. That's Kimball Payne we're talking with as well, Vivian Page. It's Brian Kerwin, who's on the Gloat Cam tonight. We're joking about that only because you said that to us, and I loved it. It was a great line. It was a great line. And Don Lozado from the Virginian Pilot. Let's move to the one of the other very, very interesting races in this in terms of the House of Delegates, and that has to do with the Bouchard-Stolley race. Boy, I'm telling you what, I think everybody in Hampton Roads thought they were voting in that race, given all the TV ads. I think people on the peninsula were surprised to see, we're Stolley and Bouchard. I thought we're voting on that one. Boy, what a race.
Joe beat Joe.
Yeah.
Joe beat Joe. That ad about Riverside Hospital destroyed him. Negatives through the roof. I couldn't talk to anybody without hearing about that ad and how outraged people were by it.
So why did he do that?
I think that's the question. Okay,
I
keep going back to this because I don't think people realize.
Know Joe Bouchard well.
I don't think folks realize just how.
I think my memory may be lying to me, but I thought that there was a negative ad in the first go round too that struck me as being a little bit over the top. This one was way out there, and it offended so many people. I haven't heard this kind of an outcry about any ad in the entire cycle.
And it was interesting because there was an opportunity to pull it, and that didn't happen.
He ran a second one.
Exactly. Right. Well, exactly so, and with adjustments.
Look, as long as negative advertising works, political consultants are going to use it.
But boy, that was a real misread of the electorate.
As long as it continues to work, then you will continue to see it.
If
it doesn't work, will someone think differently?
Well, see, this is the difference between polling. I'm going to get a little inside baseball. This is the difference.
This is what I like about you guys being here. We
get
the
inside baseball. This is the difference between polling and focus groups. You can pop a poll and have them say, okay, if you knew this about blah, 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 how would that change your vote? Boom, it's a big number.
I see.
But unless you run that ad in front of a focus group and get people going, whoa, that is over the top, you don't know until it's too late.
But it's the consultant class. I mean, it really is, because we've seen this over and over again. We saw this in the Drake Nye race, where her consultant said, here's a piece of paper about the house that Glenn Nye owns in Washington, and that just blew up. It just exploded. And that was the turning point in that campaign.
Well, I just, to me, that race, you talk about the consultant class, man, that's the one where you have to look at and you have to say, everybody needs to go back and take a look at that one when they next campaign when the consultant's telling them something.
Well, I think they knew they were launching a bomb. I mean,
do you think that was all they could do?
That's all you are. You're gambling.
Yeah,
because if that pays off, then Bouchard's
And was
a
it just such a situation where you had no choice? You're backed into a corner. You either had to do that or nothing.
Everybody that I had talked to for the past few weeks, and I don't cover Virginia Beach, but I live in that district, so I'd heard a lot about it, and I'd heard a lot about who was going to win, and that Stolley was probably going to win on Bob's coattails and win pretty big.
And Brother Ken on the
ballot.
ballot.
A lot of confusion about that.
Exactly, but at the same time, you've got to gamble.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to lose by a lot, you've got to gamble. And he gambled, and it blew up.
And this race, he only won by, what, 300 votes last? No, 130-something.
And that was when they were alone on the ballot.
Right.
And that was
Ken Stolley was on that ballot. Don't forget, Ken was on that ballot because the Senate races were also on that ballot. The problem is that he didn't have it. He was unopposed, so therefore we didn't have that. But there was only one way for Joe to win this race, and he had to do something as a game changer. Was it the right thing? No. In hindsight, no. But the truth is that with the amount of money that the Republican State Leadership Committee had put into this race for Chris Stolley, the amount of money that they had poured in, he didn't have any choice.
Yeah. But here's what I wonder about. Here's the question I wonder about. If you want to live to run another day, can you run that kind of ad and then come back later and say...
You know why you can? Because voters have short memories.
Except that they know him. They know Joe Bouchard. I mean, this is a local, a local race. This isn't a statewide race. People know Joe Bouchard, and that message just clanged with everything they know about him.
It was so inconsistent.
It was so inconsistent with the kind of guy that we've actually sat across the table with.
The kind of guy who's in the last 3 seconds of the ad. Yeah. Staring off into the wilderness with a ship behind him. I mean, that was striking contrast too. It's like, this guy's a scumbag. Look at me with a battleship.
It's too brutal. It is very hard to do that.
I don't know if you get away from that, and I don't know if it helps you if you say, well, my consultants told me to do it. I didn't want to, but
Finger pointing.
Well, you can, if you can, of course.
How about the Matheson-Villanueva race? Sorry, I've been across the table. I got so excited.
It's not.
Yeah, what is it like? I think poor Ron Villanueva went home to put his kids to bed and got the call.
16 votes. They're finishing the certification canvass right now. They sent it off to Richmond. If Matheson wants a recount, November 23rd is the date's been given of when he can file.
So what was behind the closeness of that race, do you think?
Combination of coattails, and certainly you start out with, Villanueva was not an unknown quantity. I mean, most of the time when you have an incumbent, the challenger starts out with a little bit behind just based on name recognition. That was not the case here. You had a councilman who was well known in Virginia Beach, and certainly even well known in that district. So he started out with an advantage that most challengers don't have. You put into it all the other pieces of all the things that Bobby had suffered throughout this campaign, made it pretty easy to see that it was going to be a competitive race.
So, I find it funny that Vivian talks about all the money that was poured into Chris Stolley's campaign and kind of leaves out the $500,000 that was spent on negative ads by the Matheson campaign. The polling that I had access to, this is no surprise, it was close. The last 3 weeks it was dead even. It was margin of
As we look at some of these races, though, from the perspective of where we go from here, and as I said on the radio show, it pains me to do that because we really just ought to take a breather. But when you hear in the national, I can't do it. I can't do it.
Virginia.
Right. And not in the House, right? But there was some punditry around the idea that Bob McDonnell may have a future on the national stage, and that the McDonnell effect really worked here in Virginia. Do you think that's?
Name of a recent Virginia governor who hasn't tested the waters. Every single one has. So
But
I wouldn't be surprised.
But he has said that he's going to serve out his term.
We're just not sure which side of Pennsylvania Avenue it's going to be.
He does have a job to do for 4 years, so.
And he's got a tough job to do.
He is
walking into
$3 billion shortfall.
Yeah,
budget
Kane's
shortfall,
already made
somewhere
$7 billion
between 1 and
in
3.
cuts. I mean, his first couple of years are going to look like Mark Warner's first couple of years, where you're sawing to the bone.
We'll see what kind of a budget Tim Kaine hands him.
Exactly. because we've never changed the budget process, which is Doug Wilder laid out. Doug Wilder did a great interview, and he laid out how you just can handicap your successor because of the very nature of our budget process. And so he essentially is writing, Tim Kaine is writing the budget for the next 2 years. And I'm not giving McDonald out here, but the truth is it's part of our process.
Well, McDonald has a very narrow window to start to take on any sort of controversial topics, because these House folks are back up in 2 years. You've got the Senate coming back up. I mean, you have a very, very short window as a governor in Virginia, and you've only got 4 years.
Yeah. So what happens to Jody Wagner from here? What happens to some of these other?
Jody Wagner sells popcorn.
A very successful business, so it's not like she's going to be unemployed.
Yeah,
Does she have a political future?
I don't see how, given the massacre by the Republicans, that any of these three have a.
Especially
How about
in her
Steve
hometown.
Shannon? How about Steve Shannon?
Who's he?
I think that what you might see is him go back, regroup, re-enter the House.
Yeah.
Think, if you will, about Don McEachin, who ran for Lieutenant Governor in 2001 and got creamed.
Yeah.
And now he's in the state Senate.
Didn't Stolly run for LG at one point? Or
Well, he was running for
Attorney General.
but didn't he run in the primary?
Yeah, it was a primary.
But I mean, Don McEachin went all the way through, and so his loss was about like this, and so, but he's now got a political future. So,
and Quentin Kidd said he made the mistake, he thinks, of assuming that the whole state is Northern Virginia, that he didn't get out of Northern Virginia soon enough.
That was among
the whole state knew who Phil Hamilton was.
Well, fair enough. And when that polling came out, even in this area, that people really didn't.
Yeah,
most people really didn't care that much about that.
Steve Shannon made a lot
issue.
of mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think probably the biggest mistake that he made was assuming that we all knew how bad, that everyone knew how bad Cuccinelli was going to be, and that he really didn't decide to do much of anything.
Yeah, he may be the king of buyer's remorse in 4 years. I mean, people may be looking back and seeing Steve Shannon as probably a great option. I mean, you never know. Yeah. I mean, 4 years, listen, you've got a guy who, I mean, the log cabin Republicans endorsed Bob McDonald tepidly, but were willing to throw Cuccinelli into the bus very hard.
They put it out there.
Yeah.
That's going to be an interesting seat to watch.
And Vivian, 2 minutes left. I got to ask you about your flyer.
Yeah.
What happened with your flyer? What was behind it?
I like to let people know who I support. It's just that simple.
Okay. Any comments?
Crickets?
Crickets? I love it, guys.
I think it was further proof that Obama's impact is gone. Obama couldn't even carry Doug Mack over the finish line.
Well, I remember your concern when a flyer showed up in Virginia Beach for Will Sessom. So
I did not. I don't know where people are getting any idea that if you look at the flyer, you'll see that Obama's picture with Cree Deeds had Cree Deeds' name up there and Jody Wagner's name up there and had Steve Shannon's name up there, and that Doug Mack's name was down below, not in any way connected to the top of that flyer. So I don't know.
Except that it was on the same piece of paper.
Okay, so would you prefer I put out two separate pieces of paper? I mean, I think it's totally different.
Political. I love political life. Mixing it up in political life.
It's like the pilot listing their list of endorsements. Some are Republican, most are Democrats, most lost. But
you are terrible.
They weren't picking winners.
We don't pick winners.
No kidding.
Right.
I had to give it to him. I had to give it to him. He needed a straight line.
That's right.
But I also noticed that the pilot weaseled out and never endorsed in that race either.
In the lieutenant governor race?
In the commissioner of revenues
race.
Commissioner of Revenues. And they weaseled out and never endorsed. So that's the only. It was the only race we had in the Hall of Hampton Roads that on South Side that they didn't endorse.
When I do this show, I always wish we had a full hour. I'm just going to say it because y'all are so much fun to talk to, and I love all the inside baseball, and so do our viewers. This is one of our most popular shows. We'll make it happen. Don't worry.
Holiday show.
You know why? Because we're not going to listen to the out-of-town consultants.
We're the in-town consultants.
We're in here for an hour. You're going to need a 10-second delay.
I'll be back in a moment with the final thought. That's very funny. Ed Asner is coming to the Suffolk Center for Cultural Arts this Sunday, the 8th, with a one-man show. He portrays President Franklin Delano Roosevelt looking back on the wide expanse of his life. I had a chance to chat with Asner earlier this week, And we didn't spend 1 minute talking about his Mary Tyler Moore days when he portrayed Lou Grant. For the record, while Lou Grant might not like spunk, I suspect Asner does. We spent our time talking about Roosevelt's Depression-era creations, the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Social Security Act, the FDIC, all part of the New Deal designed to put America back to work. Historians say the New Deal was a work in progress, not a coordinated package of economic programs, but a patchwork of creations born at different points along a long and uncertain path. Some of them worked and some of them didn't. No doubt, Franklin Roosevelt awoke in the middle of more than one night wondering what he'd gotten himself into. And given the warnings about Virginia's fiscal future, Bob McDonnell will probably have a few sleepless nights in the governor's mansion. But here's hoping this new governor will act boldly and with dispatch to put Virginians back to work in parts of the state with jobs that need doing, like rebuilding crumbling infrastructure, making high-speed rail a reality, and connecting the Commonwealth with broadband capability. That's a new deal that will leave a lasting legacy for our time. By the way, if you want to see Ed Asner as FDR at the Suffolk Center for Cultural Arts, you can log on to their website. It's suffolkcenter.com. The curtain rises at 3, and tickets are still available at 923-2900. He is very charming and not at all like the character that most people think he might be like. There you go. Next week on What Matters, education about the water on the water. See how this $1 million barge is launching a new era of environmental learning, and it's docked right here in Hampton Roads. In the meantime, I hope you'll join us for the radio side of our operation here, the News and Public Affairs program Hearsay on 89.5 WHRV weekdays at noon. Thanks for watching. I'm Kathy Lewis. We'll see you next time for another look at What Matters.